Well, welcome. Yes, this is the first of our series on abuse. We had to re-record here due to some technical difficulties, but for this time, we'll make it work. As we're talking about abuse, I would say no matter what it costs, it's important that we always tell the truth about our leaders. I'm sure you agree on that, like everyone, right? Like this is kind of, we all agree we should tell the truth, but it's easy to say when you're sitting on your couch or you're someone commenting on Twitter or something like that. The reality when you're faced with an abuser, especially within the church, is it's much more complicated to put into practice. I want you to take, for example, Ravi Zacharias. For almost 40 years, Ravi was the face of Christian apologetics. He debated non-Christians all over the globe. He built an organization that employed 100 speakers and over 250 staff members. He was world-renowned. He's a highly respected Christian leader. And shortly after his death in May of 2020 of cancer, allegations began to come out about repeated sexual abuse. About repeated sexual abuse of young women. He used the cover of supposedly needing frequent back massages because of back problems and things. In reality, he's having a ton of explicit text conversations that they found out. He would consistently travel with a personal massage therapist. He would give them expensive gifts. He would rent and pay for he would give their rent. He would give them pay for their school, and then be manipulating or coercing them into giving him some kind of sexual favors and things afterwards. The details are really disturbing, but one of these women described in an interview with Christianity Today how he arranged for his ministry to give her financial support, and then he demanded sex from her after that. So after this, he, quote, made her pray with him to thank God for the opportunity they had both received and called her his reward for living a life of service to God. So he warned her, so this is the hard part, he warns her that if she ever spoke out, she would be responsible for millions of souls lost when his reputation was damaged. So to think about the dilemma this woman was in, the burden that he put on her. The thing was, he wasn't entirely wrong. A lot of people did lose their faith in the church when they found out the truth about him. I mean, can you imagine being in her shoes? She's vulnerable. She's been helped by him. You know, her financial situation makes her vulnerable. She was beholden to him for helping her. And now she has the guilt of all the people who would be hurt by his downfall. Powerful people will leverage these kind of worries to coerce a victim into silence. And so it's easy to say we should be truthful, but the consequences of telling the truth can be tremendous, both for you and the ones you love. And in reality, it might not be safe for victims to always tell the truth. They need to move towards safely exposing the truth. They need to be truthful in their own lives. But they can't always do it safely right away. But we as the church, we have to be able to be totally honest about the reality of abuse. Even amongst Christians, even amongst valued Christian leaders, we don't want to hide behind false reputations. We don't want to keep up appearances. We need to call it what it is and face the uncomfortable reality of how it hurts people. And so we're going to be talking about abuse for there's 6 weeks of this, and it means we will need to have some uncomfortable conversations. We're going to get into some uncomfortable parts of Scripture, some things that we would rather skip over and not have to think about. We're going to look at some of our Christian heroes in the Bible biblical heroes that we're going to have to look at a little differently and understand the nature of their sin and really dig the depths of that. But we're also going to just talk about the reality of some of the things that happen in the world. And so my hope is we can approach these subjects with an open mind to the truth and with compassion for people who are being hurt. So I want to start by defining what we mean by abuse. So our culture has started to use the term pretty broadly. And then so it's become hard to define what does abuse really mean? What is it like? Everything everything bad gets labeled abusive in some camps. And then in others, there's a defensiveness about being labeled abusive. So they're reluctant to call anything abuse, because it's similar to being called a racist or something. Being called abusive becomes this bad word, and no one wants to be labeled with it. And so you'll hear sometimes on the church side say, well, it was sinful or it was conflict, but it wasn't abuse, these kinds of things. But to some degree, I think you know it when you see it. But I also want to clarify what we're talking about here. So I want to give you a simple definition and then a few characteristics that help you to do that. So for the sake of the work we're doing these 6 weeks, I want to define abuse as it's kind of harming another person for a relational benefit. In other words, I'm harming you to make me feel better. There's a number of types of abuse because there's a number of ways you could harm another person. Someone could be physically or sexually abused. Those are the most common we know about, but you can also be verbally abused, spiritually abused, even financially abused. There's a relational payoff to it, whether that be power, control, sex, money. It's not just romantic relationships. Abuse can happen in a coworker or boss kind of relationship, a spiritual or therapeutic relationship. The key is that one person is harming the other for their benefit, harming you, making you feel better, right? And so a few more characteristics that are largely present in abusive relationships. So a few of these to pay attention to. And we'll mention these different things as we go through this series. Number one, there's a power differential. And so this is really important to realize, especially in some of the less obviously violent forms of abuse. We know that when somebody gets beaten up and they've got a black eye or something like that, we know that that's abusive. And sometimes that power differential is obvious because that person's physically more imposing. But this is especially when you get into workplace or spiritual situations, there's a power differential that comes not just physical, but because of somebody's position, because of the money they have, or because the respect that they have in the community. There is a power differential that makes some things that may look kind of innocent in one way, when you take the power differential, like this person's my boss or this person can ruin me financially, then that little subtle thing can become very damaging, right? So this power differential is really important. One person has a certain level of power, authority, or influence, and that amplifies the harm of what we're doing. The second one is manipulation. In order to perpetuate, justify, or hide the abuse, they're usually insidious kind of games of justification, deception, because confused, disoriented people are much more vulnerable and they're easier to control. So often a person who has a pattern of abuse is going to find ways to keep somebody submissive or to keep them lost, confused some way, because to not realize they're being abused or things like that, because that's going to help them keep going and that's going to keep them from talking. And so there are lots of ways of doing that. You'll see that kind of in our second week of this series. You'll see that a lot more talk about some of the ways people manipulate. The third one, a pattern of abuse, is there's a violation of consent. You're pushing past somebody's boundaries. And this can be tricky because some factors may make it impossible for a person to truly give consent, such as their age, or they may not know certain information that may make it hard for them to consent. They may be intoxicated in some situations, and so they can't really coherently give consent. And also, people can be coerced into technically giving consent, that they said it was okay, to behavior that is really horrific. But it's because of the way they've been manipulated or gaslighted or something like that, that they say under pressure that they will agree to something. So that may change a legal dynamic of somebody technically gave consent, but there is still an abusive dynamic when somebody is forced to do something they don't want to do. It pushes past certain boundaries that should be respected. So abusive behavior, it violates the needs, it violates the desires and the agency of the other person. So that's the third one. And then our fourth one is dehumanization. It's a big word. Abusers tend to look down on the person they're abusing and treat them as objects. They're objects to be used, objects to be discarded when they don't need them anymore, rather than as bearers of God's image. So they're not respected or seen as a full person. I don't as an abuser, I don't really care how they feel or how this affects their life. I just care how it affects me. I need something, and this person is a means to getting it. And so whether that's a sexual need, or I'm just, I want someone to like me. I want someone to stay with me. I want somebody to say these nice things about me. I want somebody to do work for me, whatever it may be. There's an objectifying of that person. And that's the dehumanization, because we're not treating them as a full person. They don't get to make their decisions. They're just here to serve a means. They're a means to an end for me. So that process is also part of how a person desensitizes themselves to be able to harm another person. So when if you're doing harmful things to other people, there's a natural form of guilt and shame that are going to come up when somebody else is hurt. Somebody else doesn't enjoy what's happening. So I have to, if I'm in an abusive mindset, I need to justify that in some way in my mind. I need to find a way to not see that person as human, because that helps disable the guilt that I feel. If they're just an object, if they're just, people look down, and whether that's, because of race, because people look down on gender issues, they look down on women, whatever it may be. If I see them as just an object, that they're not really fully human, that person's really evil, that person's really wicked, I look at those things that way, then I don't feel as bad for hurting them. And so it's part of that justification process that an abuser goes through. So there's those four. So we've got a power differential, manipulation, violent consent, and dehumanization. I think when you're looking at abuse, those are the kind of things you're looking for. You're looking for a harmful relationship. And so whether that's physical, sexual, financial, whatever it is, you've got harm going on for a relational transaction. And then you've got some of these qualities permeating that, then we're talking about abuse. So I want to start with, here we're looking at a biblical example of what abuse really looks like. One of these hard passages of scripture that maybe we like to skip. We like to not have to listen and think about these things, but so this is the horror of abuse. The Bible doesn't pull any punches. It's real about some of the horrible things that happened in our world. And so I want you to start to see a situation like this from the perspective of a victim. We all agree it's bad, but we might skip over it quickly without paying a lot of attention to how this affects someone. So women who've been sexually assaulted know the kind of behavior well that we're talking about here, and can easily put themselves in Tamar's shoes. So I want to read this, 2 Samuel 13, 1 through 20. It's a little bit long, but I just want you to kind of listen to it as we go through it. Now, it was after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so frustrated because of his sister Tamar that he made himself ill, for she was a virgin, and it seemed hard to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He said to him, "O son of the king, why are you so depressed morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Then Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, the sister of my brother Absalom." Verse 5 says, Jonadab then said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me some food to eat, and then let her prepare the food in my sight, and I may see it and eat from her hand.' So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand.' Then David sent to the house for Tamar, saying, 'Go now to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him.' So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down, and she took dough, kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. She took the pan and dished them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, 'Have everyone go out from me.' So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, 'Bring the food into the bedroom, that I may eat from your hand.' So Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them into the bedroom to her brother Amnon. So she gets... You feel the tension rise, like now she's alone. He's sent everyone away, and he's tricked her into now she's alone in the room with him. When she brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her, and he said to her, 'Come, lie with me, my sister.' But she answered him, 'No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. As for me, where could I get rid of my reproach? And as for you, you will be like one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you.' However, he would not listen to her, since he was stronger than she, he violated her, and he lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, for the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go away." But she said to him, "No, because this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you've done to me." Yet he would not listen to her. And he called this young man who attended him and said, "Now throw this woman out of my presence and lock the door behind her." Now she had on a long sleeved garment, for in this manner the virgin daughters of the king dressed themselves in robes. And his attendant took her out and locked the door behind her. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her long sleeved garment which was on her, and she put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Then Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? But now keep silent, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this matter to heart." So Tamar remained and was desolate in her brother Absalom's house. So, as I said, the Bible doesn't pull any punches. This is just raw, ugly mess that we see in Amnon and Tamar. And anyone reading it knows it's bad. This is not a hard one to see that this is not good behavior. But we often read this, and I hear this described in terms of how it affected David's family, because this is David's son, as he's king. And so we see the mess that it created in his family. We see an ongoing thing between Amnon and Absalom over this, because Absalom's very angry about how he's harmed his sister. And so there's ongoing things because of that and the ramifications of the family. But the lost person often in description of this is Tamar and how it harms her. Women who've been sexually assaulted, as I said, know this kind of behavior well, and they can easily spot some of these manipulations and things that are here. Obviously, Amnon harmed Tamar by raping her. If we think of some of our definitions of abuse, there's obvious harm there. And she clearly said no. He coerced her into it. So notice the anguish from her at the end. This wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you've done to me. And this other one in verse 19, that she put her hand on her head, she went away crying aloud as she went. You can see how much emotional damage this has done to her. And it does a lot of harm to a woman, which made her probably unable to be married. She was seen as tainted by the people because of this, and she knew that. So he's harmed her societally and culturally in a big way by doing this to her. And there's obviously this obvious benefit of sex that Amnon was seeking. He lusted after her. He was possessive, and he didn't want even the offer of marriage. If you notice, she put that out there. She had said that ask the king, he wouldn't even withhold me from you. She's saying, like, he would let me marry you, and he doesn't even want that. He clearly just wants to use her. And so if you notice, there's a power differential. Besides the cultural power of being a man and being a son of the king in a patriarchal society, so he culturally already has way more power than her. It also makes clear he's physically stronger as well. It says since he was stronger than she, he violated her and he lay with her. This is a really brutal situation. So also, did you notice all the manipulation that was there? And the manipulation, he lies to coax her into his room, and his intention, he made sure he was alone with her, and he had her in a vulnerable position so he could take advantage of her. The violation of consent. I love this. That her no is very clear in here, and it's recorded that the violation of consent. She definitively told him, "No, do not do this disgraceful thing." Right? She begs him not to do it. And finally, one of the subtle things that we don't as easily notice, but the dehumanization of, and it's a very real thing when it talks about the way he switches from one, he loves her, he's obsessed with her, and then once he has her, then he hates her. It's actually not an uncommon abusive rapist kind of reaction, because now he associates her with something bad that he did. And often abusers will blame the other person, so he's probably in his head blaming her for tempting him or something like that. It's common, but the dehumanization the way he treats her is once he's through raping her, he hates her and he discards her. So he orders his attendant, in verse 17, throw this woman out of my presence, lock the door behind her. So he used her for sex, but then had no regard for her wants, her needs, her emotions, how this is going to affect her afterwards. Once he got what he wanted, he threw her away like she was trash. So this is kind of the horror of what abuse looks like. And so we see all these elements that we just talked about in defining abuse here in one situation. This is, you can categorize and almost sterilize it when we talk about some of those categories about the power differential or the manipulation. We can talk about those things. But when you see it in action, when you witness somebody actually do something like that, you see the horror of it. And so when we think about Tamar, you think about how this impacted her. When you think about her as a woman in society, as I said a minute ago, she's not allowed. She's probably not able to marry after that. It speaks of her going and living with her brother Absalom and staying with him, but she's probably considered damaged goods to a lot of those men around her now. And Amnon doesn't want her, no one else does, so she's not able to be taken care of. And, so she's harmed greatly from that. She's physically harmed, she's emotionally harmed, she's just damaged. This is life altering for her. To Amnon, he throws her away like trash. So when you think about it, from the effect it has on another person, it's horrifying. So, but there's this other question too for Amnon. Where did that sense of entitlement come from? Especially when it comes to women. He thought, I see this woman, even though she's his half sister, basically. He's seen her, he thinks she's beautiful, he wants her, so he just thinks, I'm just going to take her. Where does that kind of wrong thinking come from? Where does that sense of entitlement come from? It's not hard to tell. Honestly, we just have to look at his dad, unfortunately. So when we talk about the silencing of victims, this might taint your view. This is one of our biblical heroes that we know the story. You might not have read it through this filter of abuse and how it affects the victim, but we're going to look again at the story of David and Bathsheba. And so we usually, and I've heard this taught quite a few times or referenced quite a lot of times about different things. And usually, I can say 99% of the time when I've heard it talked about, it's told from a male point of view. It focuses on David's failure, how this affected his relationship with God, how it affected him as king. It's always taught as wrong, but it's taught from his point of view and how it's affecting him as a man of God, and not really how it's going to affect Bathsheba, how it affects a woman in this situation, or to see the abusive traits that are there. And so this poor woman, Bathsheba, who was innocently taken advantage of by David. And so I won't even get into it. There's people that take this and will blame Bathsheba. That we can kind of discard out of hand. That in no way paints this as her sin. It paints it as his. But so I want to read. So this is in 2 Samuel 11. I'm going to read these first 5 verses here. It happened in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed at Jerusalem. Now when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. So David went and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent messengers and took her, and when she came to him, he lay with her. And when she had purified herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David and said, "I am pregnant." So here's the crisis, right? Like, this is the summary of this thing that happened. But I want to pause here and notice some signs of abuse. I've usually heard people characterize this as an affair by David, as if he cheated on his wife, as if it's sexual morality, yes, but not, abuse or rape or something like that. I step back. I don't like to use the term. Some people will refer to this as rape. I think that's because that's more of a legal term in our thing. I don't want to worry about that because, he was a king and he probably couldn't be prosecuted for a rape, so to speak. We usually reserve that for like a legal definition, but I will definitely characterize it as abuse. So I want you to notice the coercion that if you notice, hold on. Let's do that. If you notice, he sent messengers and he took her in verse 4. This is not a mutual kind of deal, right? He sent people that work for him. He's the king. He sent people and they took her. Don't forget these huge power differentials here, which he took advantage of, and a lack of real consent, because here we have a man who's the king over Israel. She is not, Uriah, her husband, is a Hittite. She's not even a true Israelite. So she has a very little cultural power, right? Her husband's a normal infantry guy in the war. She's just a normal woman who he looks down upon her, sees her, she's beautiful, he sends people, he takes her. There's this big power differential and lack of real consent from her. Like there's no ability to consent when you are, this woman who's been taken by the king's men and brought up there, as if she really has much choice in the matter. Right? We'll get to that a little more later, but there's a lot of manipulation, especially after the fact, and he totally dehumanizes her and uses her. He objectifies her right off the bat. We can see when he's staring at her while she's bathing, right? Already he's objectifying her. And once he is done, he sends her away. This is, there's some similarities to Amnon. So he saw her, he wanted her, he took her. So, what do you think happens if she was to defy the king? If she says no, what's really going to happen? It doesn't seem very safe. And we'll see even more so why. But now she's pregnant, right? So we see that in verse 5. I want you to, it's not really spoken, but what do you think she's feeling now as a woman who has been pulled into this situation out of the blue? Her husband's away. The king takes her, brings her, sleeps with her, and now here she is. She's pregnant. I imagine there is a lot of fear. Like, oh no, I'm pregnant with a child. What am I going to do? How is this going to work? Right? She's caught and she's stuck in this situation. So let's keep going here and start in verse 6. David sent to Joab saying, "Send me Uriah the Hittite," her husband. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked concerning the welfare of Joab and the people and the state of the war. And David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house, wash your feet." And Uriah went out of the king's house, and a present from the king was sent out after him. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. So there's a back and forth that continues after this. It's kind of long, but where David really wants to convince Uriah to go home to his wife, and Uriah refuses. So David even gets him drunk in hopes he would go home, but he sleeps with David's servants instead. And so it may seem obvious. What's David trying to do here? Obviously, his plan was foiled because Uriah wouldn't cooperate. But what he's hoping is that Uriah's going to go home and sleep with his wife, and they'll cover up his sin. Right? Is that now? Oh, they can say the pregnancy was Uriah's, but what's he asking Bathsheba to do when you think about that? Can you imagine what he's putting on her, or what she's supposed to do? She's supposed to lie to her husband and not tell him what happened. She is supposed to sleep with her husband after all of this has happened. And then she's supposed to pretend for the rest of her life that this child is Uriah. That's all that David was putting on her right from the start, right? Can you imagine having to do such a thing, to spend the rest of your life lying about this child, knowing that this child came from David, but telling your husband it was his? And so that's the first thing that David's just expecting her to do. Like I said, this is the dehumanizing part, the manipulation that you see of the way he just disregards her as a person. He cares very little for what it's going to put her through to have to do this for the rest of her life. It ends the problem for him, and so that's what he wants to do. So when that plan failed, what does he do next? Right? We skip to verses 14 here. Now in morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. He had written in the letter saying, "Place Uriah in the front line of the fiercest battle and withdraw from him so he may be struck down and die." And I'm like, David made sure that Uriah was killed in battle, And he sends the letter in the hands of Uriah himself that he knows he won't read. I'm like, that's really cold blooded. That you're going to send him with his letter. That's his own death warrant that he's supposed to hand to Joab in battle. It's really harsh to just go, wow. I mean, this is David caring so little for anybody else and how they're affected that he's willing to say, kill him because that'll make this situation easier for me. So let's get the details of the battle. We can go down because he does die. So here's verse 26. Now, when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. So what do you think that moment was like for Bathsheba? First, she was supposed to prepare herself to sleep with her husband and lie to him about the pregnancy, and she's supposed to carry that secret for the rest of her life. That didn't work. So now she finds out that David had her husband killed. When he didn't cooperate, she finds out he had her husband killed. Like, to me, this is like mob boss kind of behavior, right? Like, this is the kind of thing you see in a mob movie where it's like, oh, he didn't cooperate and now he's dead. And that's a really, really scary moment, right, for Bathsheba. Now here she is saying, okay, he didn't cooperate and now my husband's dead. So she's grieving, but she's also scared. Like, what happens if I don't do what he tells me, right? It's a terrifying situation she's put in. And so when we talk about a power differential and the fear and intimidation that's there, it's immense. And she's grieving her husband, but you notice David doesn't, if you read through this, David doesn't shed any tears. Here's what David's response. When the time of mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife, and then she bore him a son. But the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. So notice again, another not mutual meeting. David sent and brought her to his house. This is, what is expected of her now when you see. So now that the time of mourning is over, David says, bring her here, because David's going to cover this up one way or another, right? So she's expected to stay silent, keep up appearances, and pretend the pregnancy occurred after Uriah died, and she married the king, so that everyone can think that this was legitimate. And so all of this that's put on Bathsheba, when we see how much abuse and weight he put on her to try and keep this silent, because David doesn't want his sin to be known. So don't miss this last sentence. The thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. I love that is in there. We don't always get this clarification in Scripture. There's a difference between, we talk about in stories, there's a difference between descriptive and prescriptive passages in the Bible. Your descriptive is just telling you that it happened. It's not necessarily telling you it's good. But in this case, the Bible is making very, very clear that God wants no part of the way David is acting here. This is one of those situations where the Bible doesn't pull any punches about how awful his behavior is. And that's why I've heard people trying to justify David because we love David as this character in all these other ways. But we don't need to do that. The Bible doesn't do that. The Bible very clearly declares that this was evil behavior he was doing, right? For killing Uriah and the harm he put on Bathsheba, this is the worst of the worst. This is like the low point of David's life, and it has big ramifications for the rest of his life. And so with that clarification, we just want to be honest and call it the same thing the Bible's calling it. This is evil, right? Abuse isn't evil because of the damage it does to other people. So David's sin doesn't just affect him. Right? This isn't just his issue with sex that he has a problem with. His issue with women, which he does, that becomes a problem for him. But here he's taking it to a level where this isn't a consensual thing. He is harming another person, manipulating her and putting her under all of this stress and pressure, fearing for her life if she doesn't follow him. So we've seen that the Bible is honest with us about abuse. Like, these are clear ones. And so it doesn't pull any punches about the evil that happens in relationships. So I want to talk about a couple of things we can learn, especially from this story about David, because there's some good things. Number one is that God hates abuse. We just saw that. God explicitly calls it evil. And a lot of evil things happen in our world, and the powerful do take advantage of the powerless. So just because God hasn't stopped it doesn't mean he approves it. And so if you keep reading in chapter 12, you see God holds David to account and brings severe consequences on him, brings severe consequences on his family. There's a ripple effect of all this. And part of that is what happens with his sons. The example that his sons have seen perpetuates more abuse. Amnon, where does he get this idea that he's entitled to just go take some woman that he finds beautiful? Well, he watched his dad do that exact thing, right? It's not hard to see where that ripple effect happens in his family. And that's pretty much what God tells him will happen. There's severe consequences from that for how he treated Bathsheba and Uriah. And so it might seem obvious, but if you're in an abusive relationship, it can feel like God has rejected you or abandoned you. So sometimes God's judgment takes a while to play out. But he does make it clear. God wants to state very clearly in this story with David especially, he makes it clear he is on the side of the powerless. So secondly, lying is not love. And this goes full circle back to what we talked about at the beginning. Remember, Ravi Zacharias threatening the woman not to talk. David is doing the same thing here to Bathsheba. And so anyone asking you to lie about how they are treating you does not have your best interest at heart. This is something that I want to emphasize strongly. Abuse thrives in secrecy. And so, as we talked about at the beginning, it can be complicated if you're in danger. If you're in an abusive relationship, it may not be safe to go tell the truth. So you may have to work toward that. You may have to put certain protections in place. You may have to prepare yourself. You may have to be moved out before you can say anything to police or to a pastor or something. But so it's hard. But lying is not loving. Definitely be wise. Be safe. Choose your battles wisely. When you have an abusive person, you know them and you need to make sure you're safe. Bathsheba didn't have much choice either. She had to go along with what was going on, or she would have probably been killed. This is basically what we see from her. And look, what happened to her husband. But we have to call it what it is. And so I think from a church standpoint, when I see myself as a pastor and a counselor, I see that as we have to tell the truth. And I think those of us who are in a position to talk about these things, who have an opportunity to teach about it or help people who are in these situations, we have to publicly tell the truth about abuse and what it is, and to say, this is not okay, and we're not going to lie about it because this person is really important to us. We really like this person, or we don't want to deal with the ramifications that will come if we have to own this person's sin. No one in Ravi Zacharias' group wanted that to be true. They didn't want those allegations to be true. They really wanted them not to be true, because if they ruin his reputation, this whole organization is built around his fame and his reputation. So it's going to destroy all of our jobs. All of us are in danger if we reveal the truth that he really is this abusive guy that some people have started to say he is. So there's a resistance within that. But lying is not loving. It's not loving to hide it, to try and help this person protect their reputation. That's not a loving thing. Let's look at, here's something in 1 Corinthians 13:6. This famous chapter on love. It tells us that love, it does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. A person who is hiding from the truth is a person who is in sin. And so if you need help or support to get to that place where you can be free and honest, we want to help you get there. So this is the part we can play sometimes as a church, as a counselor, what I do individually, is that when someone needs help getting to that place where they can tell the truth about the abuse they're experiencing, get support. Yeah, I think that's going to be, I'll talk about that in a second, but don't buy into the lie that you need to hide the truth. Certainly not thinking that it's loving. If you have to for a temporary time, so be it, but get to where, move towards telling the truth, because it'll set you free as well. And definitely, anyone who loves you will not ask you to lie for them. That is not a loving act. If someone is telling you, you need to lie for me, they are not loving you, they are abusing you, right? And this third one, get support. If you are in an abusive relationship, you will almost certainly need help to escape. Or even to tell the truth about it. Sometimes you will need protection. Well, on this topic, I should say a little bit about, confidentiality and how it works. Mandated reporting is part of that. I'm a licensed professional counselor, so I am a mandated reporter. When someone comes to me and they're talking about abuse, I have certain rules. So I keep everything confidential, but there's a limit to that confidentiality. And the limits are if you are a threat to yourself, like you're going to harm yourself or commit suicide, if you're a threat to another person, killing somebody, or if you are abused, or if there's a child in harm's way. If a child could be harmed, a child's being abused, neglected, something like that, then I have I'm a mandated reporter for those things. So I have to report those things to authorities or alert a person who could be in danger. But to know, like, if there's kids involved, certainly any of that abuse is something that I have to report. But if there's not, if it's just between adults, a lot of that abuse may not be something I'm mandated to report. So I can keep some level of confidentiality, but I will act in order to keep somebody safe. So that's how I'm going to operate with all of that. But you can come and talk to a therapist or somebody who's mandated to be confidential that can help you understand your situation and figure out what you can do to get safe. So often you're going to need that. If it's a dangerous person, you're going to need it. So we're going to talk a little more in a few weeks about what it looks like to report abuse. Highly recommend Shelley Holdman and Safe Now is a group that we love, and Shelley's going to talk here in a few weeks about what that looks like when someone reports, especially sexual assault, things like that. But Bathsheba shows how little power a person has when they don't have support. We see this character of Bathsheba who has said, she had no ability to resist the king, especially her husband's killed, and now here she is. She has to do what he wants. But when we think about that, the neat thing for her is that we see as we go later in that story, it was Nathan, the prophet Nathan, who was the one who confronted David. He had more power. He had the ability, and he took some risk himself, because David could have killed Nathan for, coming up against him. That was certainly a king could operate that way if he wanted to. And so Nathan's putting himself at risk, but he at least had a voice. He had an option to speak to the king and was somebody that the king respected. And so when he came to David and confronted him about his behavior, David listened. So Nathan becomes somebody who does bring David to a point of repentance. Part of the reason we revere David, there's other things David did that are great. And part of it is we see David as a person who, when confronted, eventually did repent of his behavior. But there's also this neat thing too. Nathan became a supporter of Bathsheba, and he helped her survive the transition to kingship. You see later in 2 Samuel, when David is about to die, and there's some scrambling around of people who are angling to try and get into that king position. We knew that David wanted Solomon, who was the son of Bathsheba, to be the king after him. And it's Nathan that kind of warns Bathsheba that this is coming, helps her, and he helps her survive that transition to kingship and helps her son get into that position. So I see overall, and we'll see this in some other stories we're going to go into the series as well, is that God protected her, this vulnerable person, and he worked through her son, even through the horror of a horrible circumstance. This is never the way we would want anything to start. God calls this behavior evil, but with a little support and help from first Nathan being the only person who stepped up and took a risk to support her and help her. With someone like that, she was then able to get into a better position. She was able to be in a little more powerful position, and thus she's able to help herself. Let's not sugarcoat it though. I mean, when God works in these situations, but even amongst God's people and seemingly godly leaders, horrific abuse can take place. So no matter who it is, no matter how much they are publicly admired, we have to tell the truth about abuse, whether it's telling the truth of Scripture when we read a story like David, whether it's telling the truth about our leaders, our teachers are people that we revere because I just love the message this person gave me. Maybe this person said something that really inspired me, that maybe there's a message I listened to or a book that I read from this pastor. And man, it really changed my life and it opened up scripture to me and encouraged me. It's really hard in that situation to acknowledge when you find out later that this person has some major issue going on in their life or that they're harming other people. But we need to be able to tell the truth about that and hold those things together. If we don't, and if we hide it and we don't tell the truth about abuse, it spreads, just like we see with David. It spreads in generations. You have multiple generations of trauma. You have multiple generations of abuse. Other people, the next generation doesn't learn that behavior is wrong because no one ever confronted it. Or they don't learn that the church can be a safe place because never was, because they never confronted that behavior. So if we want those things to stop, we have to shed light on it. We have to tell the truth about trauma, about abuse, and about this kind of behavior. So again, just think about somebody that, if you know somebody who's been mistreated, who's been cheated on, who's been abused, I want you to take time to think about what it is like for them. We saw a couple examples in this of people who were harmed that maybe we often forget about the victim in the situation. You know, we don't talk a lot about how did this affect Bathsheba or how did it affect Tamar. We just look past them and forget about them when the situation is over. But I want you to think about it. If there's somebody you know who's been through that, think about what it must have been like for them. And if you don't know, it's a good thing to ask them what it has been like. Listen to somebody tell you who's been through abuse, who's been abused, whether they were abused as a child, whether they've been abused in a marriage, whatever it may be. Maybe it's an abusive boss or a pastor. It's really healing for somebody who's been abused to be able to tell the truth of what happened to them, to honestly be able to call it what it is and have another person not contradict them, not say, no, but he's a leader. We don't want to talk bad about him. To not shut him down, but to let the truth come out, whatever the truth is. And if it's a hard truth we're going to have to reckon with, then so be it. But we want the truth. So if you are the one, how can you practice telling the truth to yourself and others about your abuse? Is there somebody that is safe who can help you, where you can get support? Is there a place where you can tell the truth? If you've never told the truth about your abuse, or like a lot of people, I've told the partial truth, but I've never really told the whole truth. There's a lot of people who are healing who may have told enough to get some help or get out, but maybe never told somebody the whole story, maybe never told how bad it really got. I would encourage you, telling the truth is important. And if you can find a safe place to do that, to start that process, even if it's just one step in that direction, to find somebody that you can tell the truth about your abuse to, I recommend you pray about, look for those opportunities today. And if we can help to be a support in any way here at the church, at Grace, or for me, please contact us, because we want to be a place that is safe, that tells the truth, that isn't afraid to dive into messy situations, even when they're hard. So if we can help in some way, we want to do that. So thank you. And with that, I think we can wrap this up for today, and we will see you again next week, where we are week 2. You'll see Molly who works for Celebrate Recovery is going to come in next week and talk about some of the manipulation tactics that abusers use. And so looking forward to hear her talk about some of that. That'll be really interesting. She's got a lot of good life experience in dealing with some abusive people, and she gives some really good ideas of helping you understand the games that people play to kind of perpetuate abuse. So don't miss that one. That's our second week of this series, and we will talk to you soon.